Hi, I'm Kylie McDonough Scott.
And I'm Rebecca Tolla Stevenson.
We're two friends
and realtors in Kingston, Jamaica.
Join us on the Island Realtors podcast as we talk about all things real estate in our island paradise. Welcome to another episode of the Island Realtors podcast. I'm Kylie McDonough Scott.
And I'm Rebecca Tolla Stevenson. On today's episode, we wanted to touch on a very important aspect of real estate. So, you have rented a place. Your landlord is not living up to his end of the bargain. Or say you are a landlord and your tenant just stops paying rent.
Uh-oh.
What are your rights? What recourse do you have? There is so much stuff we could talk about when it comes to this, but we are going to try and break it down to the most common issues or points of contention between landlords and tenants. Which brings me to our guest today, attorney at law, Christian Tavares Finson.
Thank you for having me.
Christian is an attorney with Tavares, Finson and Adams right here in Kingston. He has a wealth of experience in corporate and commercial law with an emphasis on conveyancing, and we wanted to pick his brain about leases and landlord rights and tenant rights. So thank you for being here, Christian. Let's get going on this very important topic.
Thank you for having me again. Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks, Chris, for coming. So, it is a general feeling in Jamaica, and I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but it's a general feeling people say that tenants have more rights than a landlord.
We hear this all the time.
Yeah. Is this true?
I think generally, if you look at the Rent Restriction Act, there is a level of protection for both parties. But I think it's fair to say that you can't simply chuck your tenant out if they're not paying. These are people's homes, they may have young children and so on, as the case may be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there is a level of protection that is afforded to a tenant to allow for that time if they need to relocate. So I think that is where...
Or what if they're not trying to relocate?
Well,
or if they're paying you rent and not paying you rent and just staying in your place?
That's a very good question, and I think that, in all instances, the courts are available to you as a landlord and even as a tenant, where you can either sue for possession or sue for recovery of rent arrears, as the case may be. So, there are other recourses available to you other than simply packing up your tenant's things in a box and putting it by the gate. And in fact, the Act does speak to a level of illegality if a landlord was to do that.
Right.
I think we're going to get into that later, huh?
Yes, but landlords have a responsibility, first of all.
That's true.
Right.
And a lot of people actually go into the business and they say they're going to buy a property for investment and they're going to rent it to become a landlord, but they actually don't realize how much work it is
it's a
being
job.
A landlord.
It is, because landlords have to make sure that a rental property is fit for habitation before the tenants first move in. They have to,
Correct.
keep it in a habitable condition, through repairs and maintenance after the tenants have moved in.
Right.
And, they're not going to have to make sure that the property is structurally sound, but that it has adequate water supply, adequate electricity supply. It's a big responsibility. People take it too lightly. So.
Yeah, you don't want to just stick your tenants in and never check on them, never make sure that they're comfortable. It's a job. It really is.
Well, I think I would add that, this is it really is an important relationship that you have to build between yourself as a landlord and a tenant. And in fact, this is, people will be living there. This is the roof over their heads.
That's
so
right.
It may very well be the most important relationship that they have on their side as the tenant, which you as a landlord will have to also manage along with them.
So I want to ask, repairs. When I do a lease, I usually put in a lease that the tenant is responsible for some repairs because, I don't think that a landlord should be harassed 24/7
to change a light bulb.
Or fix a running toilet or something like that. I mean, landlords should be called in for the major things. And I usually put in the lease that, say you're renting a place for 100,000 Jamaican dollars. I usually do it as the repairs for the tenant are usually 10% of the $100,000. So 10 for every repair that costs $10,000, like a broken toilet, or I don't know, what do we run into all the time?
Or something.
Something like that, that the tenant pays for that.
Right.
Is that legal?
Well,
We asked this
wasn't-
now. We've
I
done
wasn't-
150 leases with
Ooh,
this.
I hope it is.
I wasn't aware that you're in the business of drafting leases.
Oh,
But
Should we not
no,
leave
no,
that
no. Let me just start by saying that I think the important initial stepping stone has to be to put a lease in place
absolutely.
Right.
to govern the relationship between the
Need to
tenant
have
and
a
the
lease.
landlord. So right off the bat, I think that is important, and I commend you for trying to ensure that properties do have legitimate leases.
I know you're better at drafting leases than I am,
in
and
place.
Rebecca is, okay? Don't
Yeah,
try and
we
show
know,
us
we
up
know.
there. But we try.
I think that the issue of whether or not you're allowed to, put a sort of benchmark on when the landlord should step in and
Pay
to
for a
cover a
repair.
repair or not is entirely a commercial decision between yourself
And the tenant.
and the tenant.
Right.
So if the tenant agrees, then you don't have a problem. It's in black and white. It's signed to its witness, executed properly, and so on. And therefore, that is how the relationship is then governed. So I've seen it before, and I don't think there's a problem with inserting that in a lease.
I want to ask you a question. You said something that's really important. Having a lease is it's crucial. It's everything. And a lot of times as realtors, we get the first tenant. We get the tenant. We put a tenant into a place, and they may end up staying in there. Say they have a 1-year lease, they end up staying in there 4 or 5 years.
Right.
For the first year, we've done the lease. Coldwell Banker
Yeah.
has handed them a property with a lease and everything. It is so important for landlords to remember year 2,
Renew your lease.
year 3, year 4, renew your lease. Because otherwise, do you have any rights?
Right, you do, and I think what the courts will generally say is that the tenant is now operating on the same terms and conditions as the lease that existed
Okay.
before. So that's just a layman's way of saying that, 3 years later, and the difficulty, or I should say the danger in that, is if you had wanted to, for example, raise your rent, or you had wanted to move the benchmark for repairs, as the case may be, that opportunity would not be available to you because the rent would be, the lease would be operating on the very first lease
Right.
that
Okay.
was in place.
Right.
And therefore, nothing else agreed would matter at that
'Cause
stage.
what I had happened with a property that belonged to a family member that I put a tenant in there. Oh boy. When the lease finished, my girl just left. She was like, well, I didn't think I had to give you notice because the lease finished on October 1.
So she just
So
vanished?
she just moved out. She
So what? So they were looking for her the next month to pay the rent, and she was just vanished.
Yeah, basically. And then when I finally found the girl, she was like, well, the lease was finished on October the 1st.
I mean,
No,
I guess
is that
it's just called common courtesy. Just
no,
saying
but
bye.
that's tough.
Is
You're right.
that,
And
is that a legal thing? Did she do something legally wrong, or is she just rude?
Well,
That's a question.
I don't think I would speculate as to her demeanor, but if
Such a
if
lawyer.
if,
Such a lawyer
if, if the
answer.
contract if the
Such.
contract has a term and the term has expired,
Yeah.
then I don't think there's any further obligations other than to
Really?
deliver the property in good repair.
Right.
And you would
yeah,
not
which she didn't.
You would
So
should not
my
expect
girl-
that the place is trashed.
Yeah,
Right.
so she basically left it a mess. She left an outstanding water bill. She left an outstanding light bill. And, so we're going down to that now. We usually, in a lease, we transfer the electricity into the name of the tenant. But I don't know, for whatever reason, we don't usually do it with water.
Right.
Is there a real reason we don't do it with water so that we can lock off their water if they don't pay their rent? No, it's a legitimate question. I've always
The lawyer's
wondered, why
starting to
do
feel
we
uncomfortable
I
over
know
there.
he's sweating. Why do we transfer the light but not the water? What's up with that?
I'm not entirely sure if there is any legality behind that, but the way JPS and NWC operate are different. So to get a light bill in your name is quite common, and it's generally done, where it's easy to track.
Yeah,
It's pretty easy. NWC, on the other hand, requires a lot more, and what they tend to also require is they require a title in your name, and therefore a tenant would not be able to provide that type of information.
I understand.
So what you have to also understand is that NWC is actually tied to the property. So the property is really what would be subject to any arrears from NWC, not necessarily an individual. So NWC doesn't care if Bob is there today, but Mary is there 6 months later.
Okay.
They're going to cut the water off and require that the title holder pay the arrears. And it would be up to you as a title holder to now seek to recover the outstandings from
So wait,
you.
now I
haven't
have to
gotten
ask
back.
you, can you cut off a tenant's water if they don't pay their
The short
rent?
answer is no. And in fact, there is...
No, guys, you can't do
You
that.
can't do that. And in fact, there is... the Rent Restriction Act does indicate that you cannot harass your tenant.
If they don't pay rent,
Yeah,
sorry.
Aren't you being harassed if they haven't paid you?
they're harassing your pocket.
Yes. Seriously.
No. I think that would constitute a level of harassment. And in fact, it is a criminal offense if you're found to be harassing your tenant with a view to getting them out. So
okay.
if as I said, always remember that there is the courts that is available. The courts are available to you if you want to go and seek to recover any outstanding amounts.
All right.
Boy, but sometimes is it worth it though? Okay, security deposit. I wanted to touch on the whole idea of the security deposit. I've had instances where tenants have said they would like to live out their security deposit. In other words, they would, instead of giving 2 months notice, they would like to give 1 month's notice and have the security deposit of 1 month be applied to the second month in lieu of notice. But isn't there a danger in doing that? Because
I think
is that a good idea for a landlord to say, yes, it's okay, I'll keep your security deposit in lieu of notice? Or should they force them to pay the month's rent and then go and inspect the place to make sure that...
I wouldn't encourage it.
Well, I wouldn't. That's exactly what I was going to say. And I don't think I would use the word force them to pay. I think the agreement needs to be very clear as to how the security deposit is to be treated. And I think it would be dangerous to go outside of that and apply it in some other way. It's being held for a very specific purpose.
Right.
And
it's to cover the outstanding bills if there are any
repairs.
And any major repairs, not what you would call fair wear and tear. Any major repairs. So I think in these circumstances, it leads you back again to the relationship between the landlord and the tenant, and to ensure that relationship is good and is maintained throughout, and therefore those types of issues should not hamper the parties going forward in any way. Either they're going to stay on, or you have received sufficient notice. And that will allow you as the landlord, and the purpose for that is to allow you as a landlord to now find another tenant, as the case may be. Sufficient time.
And also, if they move out and they've used up their security deposit towards the rent,
what recourse you
if they've moved out, you get a JPS bill 3 weeks later.
Correct.
That is, I don't know, 25 grand, and you're stuck as a landlord with that. So I would never encourage it. At the same time, I would say to tenants, always treat the property as if it were your own.
Correct.
Yes.
Some people just go in places, don't care for the place, but it really is somebody's hard-earned money that they've spent to buy that place. So treat it as if it were your own. And when you're leaving, make sure to clear up all your bills and send your proof of payment to your landlord. You can just send them a WhatsApp with
here's the last NWC, here's the last JPS.
And then when you were talking about general light wear and tear. So if I moved into an apartment and I hung up my paintings and I had those little things in the wall, I'm responsible for putting back the place as I found it, right?
As you found it, correct.
Yeah.
That would be really, that is the implied expectation, from a tenant perspective. Now, I have seen in leases where it specifically outlines what needs to be done upon the tenant leaving. And it may be, servicing all the ACs, repainting,
repainting
retiling,
is a big
as the case may be. So I think in the absence of express terms in the lease that has a itemized list of what is required, one would expect that the place is put back in the condition that you found it. So, if the tenant paints it in outrageous colors that your new or prospective tenant may not like, one would expect them to put it back in a neutral white, as the case may be.
Yeah.
I like the idea of an itemized list. I think that's a good idea.
We should try that.
We shouldn't be just generally put it back how you found it. The club. I think I like that.
Well, I think
Mr. Lawyer over there, can you send us your lease?
yes. Can you just beg your template now?
absolutely.
Beg your lease template.
He's going to charge us.
Right.
By the hour.
Okay. Another thing that they need to do when they're leaving our property is have it cleaned thoroughly, please.
Yeah.
My goodness. I mean,
Yeah.
if you are leaving a
God, I
property,
hate when people do that.
just have it properly clean and report any leaks, structural issues, or infestation of vermin when it happens. Don't wait.
Yeah,
That's another thing.
I think that's interesting. In the absence of some sort of database and requirement for recommendations, and I don't mean a recommendation from a JP as the case may be, but a recommendation from either some type of institution or your previous landlord, right? Where you as the landlord know or can know that this tenant is coming in good standing. We don't really have anything like that, which is interesting. But
we could have a database for that.
But in the absence of that, one would just expect a general level of courtesy and good living, as the case may be.
How soon after, if you've complied with everything and you've left the place in good order and good standing, how soon after should you as a tenant expect to get your security deposit back?
Well, I think it's what's reasonable. I think the landlord also has an obligation to check the JPS account, to check the NWC account, and to check any other accounts that may be tied to the property to ensure that the information, maintenance, if they're to pay that aspect. So the landlord has an obligation, and I would think what would be reasonable would be 2 weeks.
Okay.
So information that's given to you, I would say the landlord needs to cross-check it to ensure that the receipt that you have from JPS is in fact legitimate.
Right.
Oh, and you know what else? Suppose the tenant does not leave the place in a good condition. How do you as a landlord itemize it so that you can take, the money from the security deposit, say to paint over the place or to, I don't know, clean the floors if you have wood floors or revarnish the floor? How do you itemize it?
Yeah. Like an invoice or?
Well, I think there is an obligation to provide an invoice, and I think it would be good sense or common sense on behalf of a landlord to ensure that any penny spent from the security deposit is properly itemized. The invoices are properly shown, and the truth is that you should involve your tenant in that process.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because if it is a situation where the floors may need to be cleaned, instead of bringing in a cleaning service, the tenant may say, wow, you're planning to apply my security deposit, I should find myself over there with a bucket and a mop and
get down on your knees.
And get down on your knees and get it done.
Yep.
So I
Save
think
the money.
I think there again it really comes back to the relationship between the landlord and the tenant, and to keep them abreast and up to date as far as how you intend to apply the security deposit, and not just not return it and say thank you very much, but I had to use it for a few things around the house because you left the place messy.
Very good point, sir. Thank you.
What about intended use of a property?
Yes, we're going to talk about breaches in a lease agreement now.
Go ahead.
And that
Take
is
it
one,
from here.
intended use, right? So I say I'm renting it to live in it, but then I open up a catering business outside of the, from the apartment. I have clearly breached,
Correct.
right?
An express term in the lease that says intended use residential purpose only, as the case may be.
So if someone has done that, and again, we've been in this about what, 7 years now, 8 years? We've had all sorts of situations. I've had this happen before. Does a landlord have to give warning to a tenant if they have broken the lease in this way, in this particular way? Or can they just give them notice and say, you know, I'm giving you your 2 months notice because you're cooking in my house?
Well, I mean, it boils back to the same relationship, tenant-landlord relationship. Now, if you have a very good tenant who you may even have a personal relationship with, you know, an opportunity has arisen and they start cooking and catering out of your apartment. I don't think
good apartment.
in your good apartment. I don't think it would be beyond a reasonable landlord to put it in writing, to say that it was brought to your attention that the property is being used in this way and so on. It was never the intended purpose.
So you put it
for
in
the
writing
lease.
first before you just run them, right?
I would say so. I would say so.
Courtesy, because suppose the tenant says they weren't given the opportunity to correct the breach. Can they go to the rent board and be like, I have a bad landlord?
I would say so, yes.
Wow.
I would say so, yes. But you know, in every case, I think that you should document the interaction between yourself and your tenant. Hence the reason why writing,
get it in writing,
get it out to them, deliver it, you know, to the unit, and ensure that it's received properly and so on, so that you document your steps, because you don't want to end up before the rent board having to explain why you have evicted your tenant for no good reason.
Kylie, what else?
What else do we want to say? I brought this up in another episode that my uncle told me once, and I really feel very strongly about it. You know, if you get a good tenant, you should try your best to keep the tenant, right?
Absolutely.
And I guess tenants can make mistakes too. We're all humans. So it's nice to, as you said, give them warning, and hopefully you can move on from whatever the issue is.
Agreed.
What else do I want to ask?
Agreed.
Okay. I have a question. Sometimes you just get a bad landlord, right? Suppose the landlord is just not living up to their end of the agreement and they aren't fixing major things.
Oh, that's a problem.
Or maybe they live on the same property with you and they're entering your flat when you are at work and snooping through your things. I've had this happen to a client.
You sound like this has happened before.
This has happened to a client. But say you really love the place and the rental rate may be reasonable and you don't want to leave. Would you be in your legal rights to stop paying rent until the landlord corrected these things or repaired these things or ceased from invading your personal space? Could you say, you know, I'm not paying rent until you fix that leak in the roof?
That's a lot of issues rolled into one.
Oh dear.
Let me try to.
We're realtors.
Let me try to dissect it. So
Not
let me try to dissect it. The issue of the landlord entering your premises. It sounds as if you're speaking about entering without your knowledge or permission.
Yes.
Correct.
That's a no-no.
I've had that happen.
That's an absolute no-no. The lease agreement should have in there a clause that deals with entry.
Yes.
And notice that should be given to the tenant to allow you time
I should
to.
put 48 hours is a good.
Correct.
Yes.
That's reasonable, because one would expect you may have personal items that you need to store away or put in a locker, as the case may be. So that's a no-no. And in fact, it to my mind, would constitute some level of trespass. You being the tenant, irrespective of the fact that you own it. There's an agreement in place, and the agreement provides for quiet enjoyment of the premises.
So landlords don't do that.
The second aspect of it is, should you or do you have a right to withhold rent? The issue here is that as a tenant, you have an obligation to pay your rent and pay it on time. That is your obligation. There's nothing in it in the lease that really suggests that an if or if you don't fix it, or I'm not going to pay it. It doesn't work that way. But what you do is you do have an obligation to mitigate your loss. So say, for example, the roof is leaking and it is damaging something that belongs to you as the tenant.
Clothing or shoes or
Right.
something, right?
What the courts would expect is that you would fix it. If you have written to your landlord to say, look, this is what's happening, it's damaging my paintings,
Yeah.
or as a case, the expectation is that you will fix it and bill the landlord for the repair if it is one of those repairs that fall within the landlord's remit.
Actually, I was
Okay.
going to ask you about that. Can you just take it upon yourself and just fix it? And then just say, well, I'm withholding. I put in a new air conditioning. Sorry, the air conditioning was leaking. You never came and fixed it. I put it in. So I'm taking out, I don't know
Out
how
of
much
the
your air
rent.
conditioning costs. I'm taking it out of the rent.
No,
Are you allowed?
the withholding of the rent is not a remedy that I would say is open to the tenant.
Okay.
Right, okay.
You would go to court
Wait,
using your lease.
you love to go to court, yeah?
Well,
It's court.
I think you're asking me what the proper
Yes.
procedure
No,
would be.
right, okay.
So in the properly,
Yeah.
you would go to court and seek to recover for damages as the case may be.
Correct.
But you do have an obligation to mitigate your loss. So the recommendation would have to be that you as a tenant repair the roof, stop the damage that's occurring to your property, and seek to recover from the landlord at some later stage.
That's right.
So if you get a bad landlord, I mean, it's just best to leave, right? Even if you're getting a deal on your property. If they're not fixing up the place.
I
then-
think tenants have to deal with that on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what may be a bad landlord to me may not be to you.
Yeah.
I don't know. But
Subjective.
But I think you want to live in peace and certainly have a good relationship between yourself and the landlord. So in the absence of that, maybe it's time to move.
So what else? What about rent increases? How much
Very
is
touchy
allowed
subject.
every year? So I get this a lot again with clients, and it's just back to my point of when you have a good tenant, try
Right.
and keep your tenant in there. If you know you have a tenant that is paying their rent on time every month, you don't even have to open the bank account to make sure that the money is in there because
Right.
you know it's there. Should you be increasing the rent on them? And how much can you go up by?
Legally.
It's a question with a couple different issues wrapped into it.
I asked these very winded
I know.
questions.
Long-winded. So the question really is, can you raise your rent? And the answer is yes, absolutely.
Yay.
And the law really speaks to you not being able to raise it without permission over 7.5%.
Okay.
So your benchmark is 7.5%. If for some reason, and I'll tell you what those reasons may be, you want to go above that, you have to make an application to the board, to the rent board, and you go and
Really?
present
Never knew
your
that.
case as to the reason why. And what they will look for and it's actually expressed, is things like an increase in the property tax
Okay.
or some sort of
Or a significant increase maybe in strata maintenance fee.
in strata maintenance or some sort of further development of the property.
Like
s-
is insurance one of them?
I think you could make a case.
Okay.
But certainly that would be tied to the property. And if, for example, you have rented a 1-bedroom, but over time you now have a 3-bedroom, you not expect that
You're paying
the
same
rental
rent.
cost is the same. So you would have to say, and of course, if you're going up 20 or 30% based on, property tax has gone up, maintenance has gone up, insurance has gone up, as the case may be, and I have built out, and the tenant knew this. The property is now 3 times the
size, right.
the space, the livable space
okay.
is now 3 times the size. Therefore, I'm putting up my rent 30%. You have to get permission for that.
Whoa.
So anything above 7.5%.
Did not know that.
Nor did I.
Okay, another thing I want to talk about is really something that us realtors have to deal with is make ready requests. Okay, now what is a make ready request? Okay, when you have a property and you've had one tenant move out and you're about to try and put it back on the market again, or you have another tenant about to move into it, what is your responsibility to the new tenant? You have to make sure what? Kylie, run us through the checklist. What I have to do to make your place, as I say, tenant ready.
Well, it has to be clean, I think, first and foremost.
Because I'm just saying some landlords will have one tenant come out on Monday and then mop the floor and have another tenant moving on Tuesday. And it's like, hold your
Hold
horses,
up, this
guys.
is not an Airbnb.
This is
Chill.
not that kind of party. So
And
what we have to
especially
do-
if someone has been in there, if someone has been in the property a year at least, there is wear and tear on the property. So I would say you have to make sure the place is clean. You have to make sure air conditions are serviced. You have to make sure if you have a generator that the generator is working. If it is a furnished property, then you would probably want to replace sheets and towels because you don't really want to be.
Get manky.
Yeah, I think here again, you'd have to apply the reasonable test. What is reasonable on the part of a landlord? And I would think that everybody knows what that is. And I think that's, as you say, the place is clean. I think a fresh coat of paint is not unreasonable.
Really?
That the yard is properly trimmed if you have trees and so on, and bushed areas that's cleaned up. So what is reasonable? And I think that is what is expected.
No, but some
in between
landlords
tenants
may not want to spend the money. That's the thing.
Well, don't be a landlord then. Find another job.
Find another gig.
Find another gig.
I think that's all we have for you folks today. We're gonna end it right there, aren't we?
Well, because you know why? This is a subject that I think we could talk a lot about. I mean, I'm sure there have been so many cases in Jamaica.
Well, I hope you invite me back.
Oh, well, we
Yes,
will
of
invite you
course,
back.
of
We will
course.
invite you back. Has there ever been a case that's really stood out to you? Like in terms of this?
A landlord
you don't have
and
to tell us
tenant
who it is, of
dispute.
course.
No, you're sending me to do research. Can we defer? Can we defer that question until the
Never
next
mind.
meeting? I
We'll have
can't
you
give you
back on.
everything. I can't give you
Can't-
everything at the first sitting.
Gotta leave something to the imagination. Okay.
We're gonna adjourn this sitting.
Well, wait, before we go now, we have to talk about the property of the week.
Well, as we've been talking all about landlords and tenants, my property of the week is actually a rental. It is for an executive. I have a fully furnished rental in the Millsboro area. It's on the ground floor of a brand new complex. It's right off of Millsboro Crescent on this road called...
I've seen the pictures.
Yes.
It's really
so
cute.
gorgeous. It's so beautifully furnished. And guess what? This apartment has its own generator and own water tank. So not for the complex, for the apartment
Definitely
itself.
going to need a lease.
Yes. Of course, I will tell the landlord that he needs to contact you for the lease. So this property is on fully furnished, $3,500 US a month. What is your property? of
So
the week?
my property of the week is actually good for someone wanting to be a landlord. I have a really nice apartment at the Pordoy, which is a property that was built by Matalon Homes around, I don't know,
It rents very
2-3
well.
years ago. This property rents very, very well. I mean, you can't find one. If you want one, you can't find one in there fast enough to rent.
Good investment.
It is a good investment. It is listed at $360,000 US. It is a ground floor apartment. It is actually unfurnished. The owner was renting it unfurnished, but it comes with appliances. It also comes with window treatments, and that is actually something that people don't think about very often
It's
when they're
so true.
putting together an apartment for
Unbelievable
rental.
how much those things
Yeah.
cost.
Yeah, they are.
Absolutely.
They're not cheap, but you need them because you can't leave an apartment with window treatments because every window has different dimensions. Anyways, so that being said, it's being sold with appliances, the window treatments. It has a King alarm system already installed in it.
Awesome.
It's 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 1,350 square feet, and it's a lovely complex. Has a gym, has a pool, 24-hour security.
What's not to love?
What's not to love? So,
Well, that's it. So I have to put in there that if you are looking to lease a property or you have a property you would like Tiger Eye to find you an awesome tenant for, do follow us on Instagram. My handle rather is at rebecca.sellsrealestate. Don't forget the dot, and
I'm Kylie the Realtor, Kaili the Realtor. And you can also find our listings at www.cbjamaica.com and also on the Coldwell Banker Instagram page. Thank you.
And for conveyancing services, let's not forget, and ironclad leases, you can enlist the help of attorney at law Christian Tavares Finson. He is located at 58 Hope Road,
That's
and
right.
you can reach him by telephone at 876-946-1729. Thank you so much for coming on, Christian. It's been awesome having you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much for having me. I look forward to coming again.
Great.
We'll have you back, definitely.
We'll have you back. You were fun. You were fun.
I think we're onto something. I think it's gonna be the trio, the property trio.
Don't get ahead of yourself. Don't get ahead of yourself. Until
Bye.
next time, folks,
Thank
stay
you.
safe out there. Thanks for watching and listening.
Bye.